Nintendo sure does like to party. After all, they basically invented the genre with Mario Party back in 1999, which they then expanded upon with their dozen or so follow-ups and a spiritual spin-off Wii Party back in 2010. And now they're at it again with Wii Party U, this time offering more minigames and more ways to play. But does Nintendo still have what it takes to host a killer party, or has it started to grow a little stale after all these years? So like its predecessors, Wii Party U is built around minigames. And as usual, you can play them by themselves. In fact, 2 of the 3 primary game modes are built around that very concept, offering a handful of games that are a little more in-depth than the others. Take the House Party mode for example, which offers several standalone games for up to 4 players, all of which use the gamepad in some novel way. For example, a minigame called Button Smasher is basically Twister for your fingers. It requires everyone to hold certain buttons on the same gamepad and Wii remote set at the same time, as instructed by the game. It can get pretty hectic, but it's also pretty fun. Then in Water Runners, you actually place a gamepad on the floor, somewhere far away from the TV. Players then use Wii remotes as spoons to carefully carry virtual water from the gamepad and walk it back to their container on the TV, without spilling it along the way. Yeah, it's about as crazy as it sounds, and it's really quite clever. Next up, we have the GamePad Party mode that similarly revolves around novel uses of the gamepad, but this time the entire game takes place only on the gamepad itself. And because of this, the games are all limited to just 2 players each. So in one game, you'll actually play a tabletop version of foosball, as each player grips a control stick to control their entire team. In another, you'll take turns in a competitive Connect 4-like puzzle game where you try to assemble Miis in the proper order. Finally, we have TV Party mode, which is where the bulk of the gameplay resides. Here you'll find 5 different board game-like experiences that feature minigames sprinkled throughout the game, such as in Highway Rollers, which is a straightforward board game with the goal being simply to reach the end. But the amount of dice you can roll at a time depends on how well you perform in the minigames that appear periodically, so the better you perform at those, the better the odds you'll have in the board game itself. Now, I've really only scratched the surface of all the games and modes available, as there's far too much for me to break it all down here. But this should give you a pretty good idea of the general playstyles available. But of course, the question is, how well do they actually play? And answering that's a little tricky. So before I do, I want to explain why I like party games, or to be specific, the first few Mario parties. And that was largely due to the sheer intensity of the board games themselves, which was derived from the brilliant interplay of the skill-based minigames, mixed with the strategy of the board game portion. Yeah, there was still a lot of luck involved, as with most board games, but it was never completely out of your hands. And that's where Wii Party U's TV Party mode falls a bit short. Take the aforementioned Highway Rollers for example. The board game portion is entirely dependent on luck, as there's not a single choice you can make throughout the experience. The only influence you have on the game itself is through the minigames, which again affects how many dice you can roll. But since that's the only factor, the board game portion feels completely arbitrary. There's really no more skill involved here than in Chutes and Ladders, a game made for 3-year-olds. It's a little hard to become engrossed in the game, or even care about winning when the winning conditions are left almost entirely to luck. GamePad Island, another TV party mode, falls victim to a similar fate, though at least this one turns every dice roll into a minigame of its own, giving you some influence on what happens during the board game itself. And though the rest of TV Party's modes aren't quite as egregious in this transparent lack of strategy, most of them simply aren't that engaging. Though perhaps the best one of the bunch is Balldozer, which is similar to the coin push game you'll find in many arcades. Here, you'll play through 5 rounds of minigames, and the outcome determines how many balls you get to drop onto the playing field, with the hopes of knocking more balls off the platform to score points. Yeah, it's still largely luck-based, but at least it gives you some control in determining when and where to drop the balls. While I did have fun with this one, it didn't hold my interest for long, and that's really the main problem that permeates all of TV Party mode. It's all very shallow, which is basically the exact opposite of what you'd look for in a board game. Okay, I know what you're wondering, what about the minigames themselves? After all, there is over 60 of them in TV Party mode alone. Well, if you played a party game before, then you basically know what to expect, as they're all still relatively simple and straightforward, which isn't a bad thing. In fact, some of them are actually pretty fun, like RC Drifter. Unfortunately, for me at least, most of the minigames are simply too passive in nature, and don't often allow for direct interaction with your opponents, which frankly makes them a little boring. With that said, I did find a subset of those games to be far more interesting, as they directly address that concern. The 1 vs Rivals games that pits a gamepad player versus the others using Wii remotes can be hilariously delightful, as both factions have a direct and immediate effect on each other in almost all 14 available games. Take Operation Sandbox for example, where the gamepad player controls a giant tank and tries to roll over his opponents, targeting him with spiked balls. I really enjoyed most of these games, as they were both engaging and used the gamepad in unique ways. Unfortunately, the 1 vs Rivals minigames don't appear that often in TV Party mode, which leaves you mostly with the duller, more passive ones. Now don't get me wrong, the Mario Party series has its fair share of clunker minigames too, but they're at least propped up by a compelling board game which added excitement to every one, because you were actually invested in the outcome. But because the board games in Wii Party U are shallow and almost entirely based on luck, the minigames are left to stand largely by themselves. Now so far, I've mostly been talking about the TV Party mode, but what about the games featured in Wii Party U's 2 other modes, being House Party and GamePad Party? So the thing with House Party is that all the games make novel use of the gamepad and are actually pretty interesting for that reason. And well, only that reason. Because once the novelty of things, such as carrying virtual water from your gamepad to the TV wears off, there's really not much left to these games. Now some of them do offer a little more replay value than others, such as Name That Face, which challenges other players to guess your facial expressions. But all of them suffer from a similar lack of depth that makes them hard to enjoy more than once or twice. However, I will say that the GamePad Party games are actually my favorite of the bunch. These too make novel use of the gamepad controller, but this time offering a level of depth that, at least for some of them, make them pretty addictive. I love foosball in real life, and it's amazing how well Wii Party U's version captures the essence of that game. Similarly, playing tabletop baseball is far more engaging than I expected it to be. And finally, Me in a Row is actually a fairly deep puzzle game that will leave you and your opponent scratching your heads. Woo, there's clearly a ton to this game, and as I mentioned before, I've still only scratched the surface of it in this review. And a lot of it is fun, just not that fun, and not for that long. The TV party mode falters, and there's far too simplistic board games which also winds up taking the wind out of the sails of the minigames themselves. Then House Party, though often creative, has little else going for it. GamePad Party, on the other hand, is actually the highlight of the experience here, though even its games grew tiring after a few play sessions. So overall, I'm giving Wii Party U's multiplayer mode 3 stars out of 5. It can be entertaining as long as you have friends, just maybe not for long, at least in my case. And if you're going solo, you should know that not all of the game is playable, and the parts that are, well, really aren't that entertaining by yourself. Sure, CPU players will fill in the blank spots in some of the games, but there's not that much fun to be had in taking them down, which is why single player gets 2 stars out of 5. Thanks for watching our review of Wii Party U, and make sure to stay tuned to GameXplain.com for more reviews and other things gaming too.